Aurora was seconds from death when she saw the smoke rising in the distance. Running toward it with Coyote snapping at her heels, the starving horse had no idea she was about to ruin a powerful man's life. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The winter morning broke over the Montana wilderness, with a silence so profound it seemed the world itself was holding its breath. Snow blanketed everything in sight, transforming the rugged landscape into an endless expanse of white that stretched toward the distant mountains. The pine trees stood like sentinels, their branches heavy with frost, and the air was so cold it burned the lungs with each inhalation. In this frozen paradise, where few dared to venture during the harshest months, a magnificent white Arabian horse stood alone on a ridge overlooking a frozen valley. The horse was a vision of pure elegance, her coat as white as the snow surrounding her, her mane flowing like silk in the bitter wind. Her name was Aurora, though no one had called her that in weeks. She had been alone for 17 days now, surviving on instinct and the faint memories of a life that seemed like a distant dream. Her dark eyes, intelligent and watchful, scanned the horizon constantly, searching for threats in a landscape where danger could emerge from anywhere at any moment. Aurora had not always been a creature of the wilderness. Just 3 weeks earlier, she had lived in luxury on the Winter Haven Ranch, owned by a wealthy businessman named Marcus Caldwell. The ranch was a showpiece with heated stables lined with mahogany, automatic waterers, and custom-blended feed imported from Europe. Aurora had been Marcus's pride, a purebred Arabian with papers tracing her lineage back 7 generations to the deserts of the Middle East. He had paid nearly $200,000 for her, and she had been groomed for championship competitions, her coat brushed until it gleamed, her hooves polished to perfection. But Marcus Caldwell was not a man who tolerated imperfection. When Aurora stumbled during a qualifying event, injuring her foreleg in front of judges and potential buyers, his affection evaporated like morning mist. To him, a horse that could not compete was worthless, a financial loss that offended his sense of business efficiency. The veterinarian had assured him that with proper rest and treatment, Aurora would recover completely, perhaps within 8 weeks. But 8 weeks meant missed competitions, canceled appearances, and worst of all, the admission that his prized possession was flawed. So Marcus made a decision that would haunt the memory of everyone who worked at Winter Haven Ranch. On a frigid December evening, he ordered his ranch manager, a weathered man named Dutch, to load Aurora into a trailer. Dutch, who had worked with horses for 40 years and understood their souls in ways Marcus never could, felt his stomach turn as he realized what was being asked of him. They drove for hours into the remote wilderness, far beyond where any roads were maintained in winter, until they reached a place so isolated that not even hunters ventured there. In the coldest months, Dutch had looked into Aurora's trusting eyes as he unloaded her, and something inside him broke. He was a practical man who had learned long ago not to question his employer's decisions. But this felt different. This felt like a betrayal, not just of an animal, but of something sacred. Aurora had stepped down from the trailer with her characteristic grace, despite the slight limp in her foreleg, and had nuzzled Dutch's shoulder as she always did, seeking the affection she had known since arriving at the ranch. Dutch had turned away quickly, unable to meet her gaze, and climbed back into the truck. As he drove away, he looked in the rearview mirror and saw Aurora standing alone in the snow, watching him leave, her white form growing smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the vast whiteness. That had been 17 days ago. Aurora had survived through a combination of instinct and extraordinary resilience. She found shelter in groves of pine trees, where the branches formed a canopy that blocked some of the wind and snow. She pawed through the snow to reach the dried grasses beneath, though the meager nutrition barely sustained her. Her injured leg had healed somewhat, though she still favored it when she walked. The wilderness had taught her lessons that her pampered life never could have prepared her for. She learned to sense changes in the weather, to find water by breaking through ice with her hooves, to conserve her energy during the coldest hours. But she was losing weight rapidly. Her ribs, once hidden beneath a healthy layer of muscle and fat, now showed clearly beneath her white coat. Her eyes, though still alert, had developed a haunted quality that spoke of loneliness and confusion. She did not understand why she had been abandoned, why the humans she had trusted had left her in this frozen wasteland. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, she would stand on a ridge and look toward where she thought the ranch might be, as if hoping to see headlights approaching, hear voices calling her name, feel gentle hands leading her back to warmth and safety. On this particular morning, Aurora stood on her usual ridge, watching the sun rise over the snow-covered peaks. Her breath formed clouds in the freezing air and her body trembled slightly, though whether from cold or weakness was impossible to say. She was about to descend into the valley to search for grass when something made her freeze. It was not a sound exactly, more a change in the quality of the silence, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that set every nerve in her body on edge. Then she saw them. 4 shapes emerging from the tree line below, moving with the fluid coordination of predators who had hunted together many times before coyotes. They were larger than the coyotes found in warmer climates, their winter coats thick and shaggy, their bodies lean but powerful from a season of hunting in harsh conditions. They had caught her scent on the wind and were now moving deliberately in her direction, spreading out in a pattern that spoke of intelligence and experience. Aurora's heart began to pound. Aurora had encountered coyotes before during her weeks in the wilderness, but always from a distance and never more than 2 at a time. Those encounters had been brief, with the coyotes quickly deciding that a full-grown horse was not worth the effort when easier prey was available. But this was different. These 4 moved with purpose, their heads low, their eyes fixed on her with an intensity that spoke of hunger and determination. Aurora could see their ribs showing through their thick coats, evidence that food had been scarce even for these skilled hunters. To them, she was not just a potential meal, but a desperate necessity, perhaps their only chance at substantial food in weeks. The lead coyote, a large male with a scarred muzzle that told of past battles, stopped about 50 yards away and locked eyes with Aurora. In that moment, something passed between predator and prey, an ancient understanding as old as life itself. The coyote's message was clear. You are alone, you are weak, and we are hungry. Aurora's response was equally primal. She wheeled around and ran. Despite her injured leg, despite the weeks of inadequate food and harsh conditions, Aurora's Arabian bloodline came through in that moment. Arabians had been bred for thousands of years for endurance and speed, for carrying Bedouin warriors across desert wastes, for outrunning sandstorms and enemy raiders. That heritage surged through Aurora's veins now, giving her strength she did not know she still possessed. Her hooves threw up clouds of snow as she launched herself down the slope, her white mane streaming behind her like a banner. The coyotes gave chase immediately. Their howls split the cold morning air, a sound that sent ice through Aurora's heart. It was not the sound of individual animals, but of a coordinated pack, communicating with each other, directing the hunt. The lead coyote and another stayed directly behind her, pushing her forward, while the other 2 split off to either side, trying to flank her and cut off her escape routes. They had done this many times before, had perfected this deadly dance through countless hunts across the frozen wilderness. Aurora ran with everything she had, her lungs burning in the frigid air, her injured leg screaming with pain each time it struck the ground. The snow was deep in places, reaching nearly to her knees, forcing her to bound rather than run, each leap draining her limited reserves of energy. Behind her she could hear the coyotes gaining ground. They were built for this terrain. their smaller size and lower weight allowing them to run on top of snow that Aurora sank into with each step. The chase led down into a narrow valley where the snow was even deeper, trapped between steep slopes that funneled the wind and accumulated massive drifts. Aurora's heart sank as she realized her mistake. This terrain favored the coyotes, and she had run directly into it in her panic. She tried to change direction to climb back up the slope, but the snow was too deep and the incline too steep. Her hooves slipped and scrambled, and for one terrifying moment she nearly fell, which would have meant the end. The coyotes closed in, sensing victory. The lead male made his move, lunging forward and snapping at Aurora's hind legs, his teeth clicking together just inches from her flesh. Aurora kicked out instinctively, her hoof catching the coyote in the shoulder and sending him tumbling backward into the snow. But the others pressed their advantage, one darting in from the side and managing to nip at her flank, drawing blood. The pain and the smell of her own blood sent a surge of adrenaline through Aurora's system, sharpening her senses and giving her renewed strength. She spotted an opening between two large boulders, partially covered with snow, and made for it desperately. The gap was narrow, but she was thin enough now that she could squeeze through. The coyotes, smaller and more agile, followed without hesitation, but the narrow passage forced them into single file, neutralizing their numerical advantage. Aurora burst out the other side and found herself on a stretch of frozen lake, the ice covered with a thin layer of snow that crunched beneath her hooves. The surface was treacherous, offering little traction, but Aurora had no choice. She ran across the ice, her hooves slipping and sliding, her legs splaying dangerously with each step behind her. The coyotes poured onto the ice as well, but they were more cautious, their instincts warning them of the danger. The lead coyote ventured furthest, still driven by hunger, but the others hung back slightly, unwilling to risk the uncertain surface. Aurora reached the far side of the frozen lake and scrambled up a snow-covered bank, her hooves finally finding solid ground again. She did not slow down, could not afford to, even though her entire body was screaming for rest. The coyotes were still coming, still howling their hunting song, though they sounded more distant now. She ran through a dense grove of pines, the branches whipping at her face and sides, leaving scratches on her coat but also providing some cover. The trees were close together here, making it harder for the pack to surround her. As she burst out of the pine grove, Aurora found herself on a ridge overlooking a vast expanse of wilderness below her stretched miles of untouched snow, dotted with stands of trees and crossed by frozen streams. Somewhere far in the distance, almost invisible in the morning light, was a thin column of smoke rising into the sky. Smoke meant humans, meant warmth, meant possible salvation. But it was so far away, and the coyotes were still behind her, their howls echoing off the rocks and trees. Aurora made a decision in that split second. She would run toward the smoke, toward the humans, even though humans had betrayed her before. The alternative was to keep running aimlessly until exhaustion claimed her and the coyotes brought her down. At least running toward the smoke gave her a destination, a purpose beyond simple survival. She plunged down the slope toward the valley below, toward that distant promise of smoke and human habitation, with the coyotes in relentless pursuit. The descent into the valley was treacherous, the slope steep enough that Aurora had to half slide, half run, her hooves struggling to find purchase on the icy surface beneath the snow. Several times she nearly lost her balance completely, her body tilting dangerously to one side before she managed to right herself at the last moment behind her. The coyotes navigated the slope with greater ease, their lower center of gravity and four-point stance giving them an advantage on the difficult terrain. Their howls had taken on a different quality now, more excited, more confident, as if they sensed that their prey was tiring. And Aurora was tiring. The initial burst of adrenaline that had carried her through the first desperate minutes of the chase was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that made every step feel like moving through thick mud. Her injured leg was throbbing with a pain so intense it brought tears to her eyes, and her breathing had become ragged and labored. Each inhalation of the freezing air felt like knives in her chest, and she could taste blood in her mouth from the exertion, but she could not stop, would not stop. Something deep within her, some fundamental will to survive that transcended logic or reason, kept her moving forward every time her body screamed at her to give up, to lie down in the snow and let it all end. That primal force pushed her onward. Perhaps it was the memory of gentler times, of a groom named Sarah who had always brought her apples and spoken to her in soft tones. Perhaps it was simply the basic imperative written into every living creature. Survive, endure, live to see another sunrise. The valley floor was crossed by a partially frozen stream, its surface a treacherous mix of ice and rushing water where the current was too strong to freeze completely. Aurora approached it with dread, knowing she would have to cross but uncertain if the ice would hold her weight. The coyotes were less than 30 yards behind now, close enough that she could hear their panting breath and the crunch of their paws in the snow. There was no time for caution, no opportunity to test the ice or search for a better crossing point. She stepped onto the frozen stream and immediately felt the ice crack beneath her weight. Not a catastrophic break, but enough to send spiderweb fractures spreading outward from where her hoof had landed. Aurora moved as quickly as she dared, placing each hoof carefully but not slowly, trying to distribute her weight while still maintaining forward momentum. The ice groaned and complained beneath her, and halfway across, she heard a sharp crack that made her heart stop. She lunged forward, throwing all her remaining strength into a desperate leap toward the far bank. The ice gave way completely just as her hind legs pushed off, and she felt the shock of freezing water engulf her back legs up to her haunches. The cold was so intense it was like being struck by lightning, every nerve ending screaming in protest. But her momentum carried her forward, and her front hooves found purchase on the snowy bank. She scrambled up and out, water streaming from her hindquarters and instantly beginning to freeze in the bitter air. The coyotes had stopped at the stream's edge, more cautious now after watching Aurora's near disaster. The lead coyote tested the ice with one paw, felt it crack, and pulled back. They paced along the bank looking for a better crossing point, their frustration evident in their body language, but they did not give up. These were not animals that gave up easily. They split up, two heading upstream and two downstream, searching for a place where the ice was thicker or the stream narrow enough to jump. Aurora used those precious moments to put more distance between herself and her pursuers. Her back legs were numb from the icy water, and she knew that was dangerous. In these temperatures, wet fur could freeze solid, and frostbite could set in within minutes. She needed to find shelter, to find warmth, but the smoke she was following was still miles away across open ground. She forced herself to keep moving, to generate body heat through motion, even though every muscle in her body protested. The landscape began to change as she moved deeper into the valley. The pristine wilderness gave way to signs of human presence. A fence line partially buried in snow, the rusted hulk of an old tractor abandoned years ago, a stand of trees that had been cleared in a pattern too regular to be natural. Hope sparked in Aurora's chest. She was getting closer to civilization, closer to potential help, closer to survival. Then she heard the howls again, now coming from two directions. The coyotes had crossed the stream and were converging on her position. They had learned from their mistakes, adapted their strategy, and were now attempting to trap her between them. Aurora's exhaustion was reaching critical levels. She stumbled, nearly falling, and had to force her legs to keep moving through sheer willpower. That was when she saw the cabin. It was small and weathered, sitting in a clearing surrounded by pines, with smoke curling from its stone chimney. The smoke she had been following for miles originated here, from this humble structure that looked like it had been built a century ago and maintained through sheer stubbornness. There were no power lines, no satellite dish, no modern conveniences visible, just a simple dwelling that spoke of a life lived deliberately apart from the world. Aurora changed direction, angling toward the cabin with renewed desperation. She could see a fenced area behind it, probably a small corral or garden, and what looked like a shed or small barn. If she could reach that enclosure, if she could get inside something with walls and a door, she might be safe from the coyotes. The predators were closing in fast now, sensing that their prey was nearly finished, pushing for one final effort to bring her down. She was 50 yards from the cabin when a door opened and a figure stepped out onto the porch. The figure was a woman bundled in layers of worn clothing against the cold, with a thick wool scarf wrapped around her neck and a knitted hat pulled low over her ears. She was holding a steaming mug in one hand, probably coffee, and had been about to take a sip when she froze, her eyes widening at the scene unfolding before her. A magnificent white horse, thin and desperate, was running straight toward her cabin with a pack of coyotes in pursuit. Her name was Elena Whitmore, and she was 34 years old, though the harsh winters and isolated life had etched lines around her eyes that made her look older. She had lived in this cabin for 6 years, ever since a devastating divorce had left her questioning everything about her previous life in Seattle. She had been a successful veterinarian there, with a thriving practice and a modern apartment overlooking Puget Sound. But when her marriage fell apart, when she discovered her husband's betrayal and watched her carefully constructed life crumble, she had made a choice that shocked everyone who knew her. She sold everything, bought this remote cabin in Montana, and disappeared into the wilderness. The transition had not been easy. City life had not prepared her for the brutal reality of surviving alone in one of the harshest environments in North America. The first winter had nearly killed her, and there were nights when she lay in her bed listening to the wind howl and wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. But gradually, through trial and error, through reading every book on wilderness survival she could find, through learning from the few neighbors who lived within 20 miles, she had adapted. She learned to chop wood efficiently, to maintain her water pump in freezing temperatures, to hunt and preserve meat, to read the weather and prepare for storms. Most importantly, she had brought her veterinary skills with her. The isolated ranchers and homesteaders in the area had been initially suspicious of this city woman who had invaded their territory, but when word spread that she could treat injured animals, their attitudes changed. She had set up a small clinic in her shed, stocking it with basic medical supplies ordered online and delivered to the nearest town. People came to her when their dogs were injured, when their horses needed stitches, when their cattle had difficult births. She charged almost nothing, sometimes accepting payment in the form of firewood or preserved food, and slowly she had earned the respect of the community. Now, as she watched the white horse running toward her with death snapping at its heels, every instinct she had developed over years of veterinary practice came roaring to life. She could see immediately that the horse was in serious trouble. Its gait was uneven, favoring one leg. Its body was too thin, ribs visible even at this distance, and the coyotes were too close, too coordinated, too determined. If she did not act quickly, she was about to witness a killing. Elena dropped her coffee mug, not even registering the sound of it shattering on the wooden planks of her porch. She ran back inside, her movements quick and efficient, and grabbed 2 things from beside the door, a rifle and a box of ammunition. The rifle was a Remington 700, a birthday gift from her father decades ago when she was learning to hunt. She had not fired it in months, but she maintained it meticulously and knew it was loaded and ready. She burst back out onto the porch just as Aurora reached the edge of her property. The horse was magnificent even in its desperate state. Its Arabian features unmistakable despite the weeks of hardship. Elena could see intelligence in those dark eyes, could see the determination that had kept this animal alive when it should have died. But she could also see that Aurora was at the end of her strength, that this was the last sprint before collapse. The coyotes were right behind, the lead male now just 10 yards from Aurora's vulnerable hindquarters, his jaws opening for the killing bite. Elena raised the rifle, sighted quickly, and fired. The shot cracked across the valley, echoing off the surrounding mountains. She had aimed high deliberately, not wanting to hit the horse by accident, but close enough to the lead coyote to get its attention. Snow exploded a foot in front of the animal's nose, and it skidded to a halt, confusion and fear replacing the hunting instinct. Elena worked the bolt action, chambering another round, and fired again. This shot was even closer to the coyotes, and it had the desired effect. The pack scattered, their hunting formation breaking apart as self-preservation overrode hunger. They retreated to the tree line, watching with wary eyes but no longer willing to risk approaching while the human was armed. Aurora stumbled and nearly fell as the pressure of the pursuit suddenly lifted. She had been running on pure adrenaline, and with the immediate threat removed, her body began to shut down. Her legs trembled violently, barely able to support her weight. Her breathing was so labored it sounded like sobs, and foam flecked her mouth and neck. She stood there in Elena's yard, swaying dangerously, her eyes glazed with exhaustion and shock. Elena set the rifle down carefully, propping it against the porch railing where she could grab it quickly if needed, and approached the horse slowly. She had worked with enough traumatized animals to know that sudden movements or loud noises could send even the most exhausted creature into a panic. She kept her hands visible, her posture non-threatening, and spoke in a low, calm voice that she had perfected over years of soothing frightened animals. "Easy now. Beautiful. You're safe. Nobody's going to hurt you here." She continued the steady stream of quiet words, meaningless in their content but soothing in their tone as she slowly closed the distance between herself and Aurora. The horse watched her approach with eyes that held a mixture of fear and desperate hope, as if Aurora understood that this human represented her last chance at survival, but was terrified of being betrayed again. When Elena was close enough to touch, she extended one hand slowly, letting Aurora see it, letting the horse catch her scent. Aurora's nostrils flared as she processed the information her senses were providing. This human smelled of wood smoke and coffee, of hay and animals, of medicine and antiseptic. These were not threatening smells, not the smell of the man who had abandoned her. Aurora made a decision, or perhaps her exhausted body made it for her. She did not pull away when Elena's hand gently touched her neck. The contact was electric. Elena felt the horse trembling beneath her palm, felt the rapid heartbeat pounding against her ribs, felt the profound exhaustion that had settled into every muscle. But she also felt something else, a core of strength that had not yet broken, a will to survive that had carried this magnificent creature through unimaginable hardship. Her professional eye was already cataloging the horse's condition and the injuries that needed attention, but her heart was responding to something deeper, to the soul of an animal that had refused to give up. "We're going to get you inside and warmed up," Elena said softly, running her hand along Aurora's neck in gentle strokes. "Then we're going to figure out what happened to you and how you ended up out here. But first, let's get you safe." Elena kept one eye on the tree line where the coyotes still watched from the shadows, their forms barely visible against the dark trunks of the pines. They had not given up entirely, she could see that. They were hungry and patient, and they would wait for another opportunity. But for now, the rifle had bought her and the horse some time, and she intended to use every second of it. She retrieved the rifle and tucked it under one arm, then gently took hold of Aurora's mane with her free hand. The horse's coat was still damp from her plunge into the icy stream, and Elena could feel it beginning to freeze in the brutal cold that was dangerous. Hypothermia could set in quickly, especially for an animal already weakened by starvation and exhaustion. She needed to get Aurora into the barn and dried off immediately. "Come on, sweet girl, just a little further." Elena applied gentle pressure, guiding Aurora toward the small barn behind the cabin. The horse followed with halting steps, her legs stiff and uncertain as if she might collapse at any moment. Each step seemed to cost her tremendous effort, and twice she stumbled badly enough that Elena thought she would go down. But somehow, Aurora stayed upright, driven by that same stubborn will that had kept her alive for 3 weeks in the wilderness. The barn was humble compared to the palatial stable Aurora had once known, but it was solid and weatherproof. Elena had built most of it herself with help from a neighbor, learning carpentry through YouTube videos and sheer determination. Inside were 2 stalls, though she currently had no animals of her own. She had kept a horse once, a gentle mare named Ginger who had been her companion during the early years, but Ginger had died the previous spring from colic, and Elena had not had the heart to replace her. She led Aurora into the larger stall, which still had fresh straw from her last cleaning. The barn was warmer than outside, protected from the wind and insulated by the hay stored in the loft above. Aurora stood in the center of the stall, swaying slightly, her eyes half closed with exhaustion. Elena quickly secured the barn door, checking it twice to make sure the coyotes could not get in, then propped the rifle near the entrance where she could reach it if needed. Now came the critical work. Elena had treated hundreds of animals in distress over her career, but something about this horse touched her deeply. Perhaps it was the aristocratic beauty still visible beneath the dirt and exhaustion. Or perhaps it was the intelligence she saw in those dark eyes, an awareness that seemed almost human. Whatever it was, Elena found herself whispering reassurances as she worked, speaking to Aurora as if the horse could understand every word. "Let's get you dried off before you freeze to death." Elena grabbed several old towels from a shelf and began rubbing down Aurora's hindquarters, which were still wet from the stream. The horse flinched at first, startled by the contact, but then seemed to understand that Elena was trying to help. As Elena worked, she felt the ice crystals that had formed in Aurora's coat, heard the horse's teeth chattering from the cold. She rubbed vigorously, generating heat through friction, working methodically across every wet area. As she dried Aurora, Elena's trained eye was making a continuous assessment. The horse was severely underweight, having lost at least 200 pounds from what should have been her healthy weight. Her ribs stood out starkly, and her hip bones were too prominent. There were multiple minor injuries, scratches and cuts on her legs and flanks, probably from running through brush and rocks. One ear had a notch torn out of it, likely from a previous encounter with predators. But most concerning was the way Aurora favored her right front leg. Elena ran her hands carefully down the leg and felt heat and swelling around the fetlock. "Old injury," Elena murmured, her fingers probing gently. "You hurt this a while ago, didn't you? And then you've been running on it for weeks." Aurora shifted her weight, trying to take pressure off the injured leg, and Elena's heart ached for what this beautiful creature had endured. The leg needed rest, cold compresses, and possibly anti-inflammatory medication. But first, Aurora needed food and water. Elena filled a bucket with fresh water from the pump she kept in the barn and offered it to Aurora. The horse drank deeply, desperately, and Elena had to pull the bucket away before Aurora drank too much too fast. An animal this dehydrated could make itself sick by drinking too quickly. She let Aurora have small amounts, waiting between each session, a process that required patience but was necessary. While Aurora drank, Elena examined her more closely in the better light of the barn. That was when she noticed something that made her breath catch. On Aurora's left hip, partially hidden by dirt and the angle of the light, was a brand. Elena wet a cloth and cleaned the area carefully, revealing the mark more clearly. It was a stylized W with a flourish underneath, a brand that spoke of money and prestige. This was not a wild Mustang or an abandoned ranch horse. This was a purebred, probably an Arabian given her distinctive features, and she belonged to someone with significant resources. "Who did this to you?" Elena whispered, tracing the brand with her finger. "Who could afford a horse like you, and then leave you to die in the wilderness?" Aurora turned her head to look at Elena, and in that moment something passed between them. Elena saw betrayal in those eyes, saw the confusion and hurt of an animal who had trusted humans and been abandoned. It was a look she recognized because she had seen it in her own mirror during the darkest days after her divorce. Elena made a decision in that moment. She would not try to find Aurora's owner, not yet. Whoever had done this to such a magnificent animal did not deserve to have her back. If they had wanted Aurora, they would not have left her in the middle of nowhere to freeze and starve. No, Aurora had found her way here, had fought through hell to survive, and Elena would make sure she had a chance to recover before any decisions were made about her future. "For now, you're staying with me," Elena said firmly. "We'll get you healthy, and then we'll figure out the rest." Aurora seemed to understand, or perhaps she was simply too exhausted to care. She lowered her head slightly, a gesture that Elena interpreted as acceptance or perhaps gratitude. Elena continued her work, checking Aurora's hooves, which were badly cracked and in need of attention, examining her teeth to estimate her age, running her hands over every inch to catalog all the injuries and areas of concern. Outside, the winter day was moving toward afternoon, and Elena knew she had a lot of work ahead of her. She needed to prepare proper food for Aurora, something nutritious but easy to digest for a starving animal. She needed to treat the various wounds, monitor the injured leg, and keep watch for signs of infection or illness. She also needed to keep an eye on those coyotes, who had not given up and were probably still lurking nearby. But as Elena stood there in the quiet barn, with this magnificent horse who had somehow survived the impossible, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Purpose. For 6 years she had been hiding from the world, nursing her wounds, questioning her choices. But now, caring for this horse who needed her desperately, she felt a spark of the passion that had driven her to become a veterinarian in the first place. "You and I were both survivors," Elena said softly to Aurora, "and survivors need to stick together." The first night was the hardest. Elena stayed in the barn with Aurora, wrapped in blankets and sitting on a bale of hay, unwilling to leave the horse alone in case her condition deteriorated. She had set up a space heater, one of her few concessions to modern convenience, powered by the solar panels and battery system she had installed on the barn roof. The heater hummed quietly, taking the worst edge off the cold, though the barn was still far from warm. Aurora stood in her stall, too exhausted even to lie down, her head hanging low and her eyes half closed. Every few hours Elena would rise and check on her, offering small amounts of water, speaking softly, running her hands over the horse's body to check for fever or signs of distress. She had mixed a warm mash of bran and molasses, softened with hot water, and coaxed Aurora to eat small amounts. The horse was hesitant at first, as if she had forgotten what it was like to be fed by human hands, but hunger eventually overcame caution. As the night deepened and the temperature outside plummeted to well below zero, Elena found herself talking to Aurora, sharing stories she had never told anyone. She spoke of her life in Seattle, of the veterinary practice she had built from nothing, of the husband who had seemed perfect until she discovered he had been living a double life. She talked about the betrayal, the divorce, the moment she had decided to leave everything behind and disappear into the Montana wilderness. "I thought I was running away," Elena said softly, watching Aurora's ears flick toward her voice. "But maybe I was running toward something. Toward this. Toward you. Maybe we were meant to find each other." It sounded foolish even as she said it, like something from a sentimental movie. But in the quiet darkness of the barn, with only the horse for company, it felt true. They were both wounded creatures who had been cast aside, both survivors who had refused to give up. Aurora shifted her weight and finally, as the night wore on, carefully lowered herself to the straw. It was a good sign. Animals in severe distress often refuse to lie down, their instincts telling them to stay ready to flee. That Aurora felt safe enough to rest spoke volumes about her trust in Elena and her desperate need for sleep. Elena watched as the horse's breathing gradually slowed and deepened, watched as the tension in her muscles finally released. Only then did Elena allow herself to close her own eyes, though she remained alert for any sound that might indicate trouble. The days that followed fell into a rhythm of care and recovery. Elena woke before dawn each morning, started the fire in her cabin, then went immediately to the barn to check on Aurora. She treated the various cuts and scratches with antiseptic, wrapped the injured leg in a support bandage after applying cold compresses, and gradually increased Aurora's food portions as her digestive system adjusted to regular feeding. She brushed Aurora's coat, working patiently through the tangles in her mane and tail, removing burrs and dirt, slowly restoring some of the horse's natural beauty. Aurora responded to the care with a gradual awakening. The dull, traumatized look in her eyes began to fade, replaced by growing alertness and curiosity. She started to nicker softly when Elena entered the barn, would walk to the stall door to greet her, would nuzzle at Elena's pockets, looking for the apple slices or carrots that had become a regular treat. The injured leg showed improvement, the swelling reducing day by day, though Elena knew it would be weeks before Aurora could be ridden, if ever. On the fourth day, Elena led Aurora out of the barn for the first time since her arrival. The sun was shining, a rare bright day in the midst of winter's gray monotony, and Elena thought the fresh air and movement would be good for Aurora's recovery. She had fashioned a makeshift halter from rope, and Aurora followed her readily into the fenced area behind the barn. The horse stood in the sunlight, her white coat gleaming, her face turned toward the warmth as if it were a benediction. Elena leaned against the fence and watched Aurora explore the enclosure, moving slowly, but with growing confidence. It was remarkable how quickly the horse was recovering, a testament to her strong constitution and the quality of her breeding. Elena had been thinking about that brand, about what it might mean. She had access to the internet through a satellite connection, slow but functional, and she could probably identify the owner if she tried, but she had not searched yet, and she was not sure she would. The peace of that moment was shattered by the sound of a vehicle approaching. Elena tensed immediately. She received visitors occasionally, but they were always neighbors she knew, and they always called ahead on the radio she kept in her cabin. This sound was different. The growl of a powerful engine pushing through difficult terrain, coming from the direction of the main road that was barely maintained in winter. Elena walked around the cabin to see who was arriving, her heart beating faster with instinctive wariness. A large black pickup truck was making its way up her access road, its four-wheel drive engaged in chains on its tires. The truck was expensive. That much was obvious even from a distance, with a gleaming paint job that seemed out of place in this rough country. It stopped in front of her cabin and a man stepped out. He was in his late 50s, wearing a sheepskin coat that probably cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe, and expensive boots that had never seen real work. His face was weathered but well-groomed, the face of a man who spent money on his appearance, and his eyes were hidden behind designer sunglasses despite the overcast sky. Everything about him screamed money and authority, and Elena felt her defenses rising immediately. The man removed his sunglasses and looked at Elena with an assessing gaze that made her skin crawl. His eyes were cold, calculating, the eyes of someone who was used to getting what he wanted. When he spoke, his voice was smooth but carried an undertone of steel. "Good morning. I'm looking for a horse, a white Arabian mare. I have reason to believe she might have wandered onto your property." He paused, as if waiting for Elena to immediately admit to having the horse. When she remained silent, his smile grew thin. "My name is Marcus Caldwell. I own Winter Haven Ranch about 30 miles north of here. The horse is valuable, very valuable, and I'm prepared to offer a substantial reward for her safe return." Elena felt ice form in her stomach. This was Aurora's owner, the man who had abandoned her in the wilderness to die. Everything about him confirmed her worst suspicions. The arrogance, the way he spoke of Aurora as property rather than a living being, the assumption that money could solve everything. She thought quickly, trying to decide how to handle this situation. She could lie, claim she had not seen any horse, but he might have tracks to follow, might search her property anyway. Instead, she chose a middle path. "I may have seen a white horse," she said carefully, her voice neutral. "But if it's the one I'm thinking of, she was in very bad shape. Starving, injured, nearly dead from exposure. If someone left a horse like that out in this weather, they should be prosecuted for animal cruelty, not rewarded with her return." Marcus Caldwell's face darkened at her words, and Elena saw a flash of anger in his eyes before he controlled it. "That horse was in an accident and escaped before we could treat her," he said, his tone smooth but his jaw tight. "We've been searching for her for weeks, I assure you. No animal at Winter Haven Ranch is mistreated. We have the finest facilities in the state." Elena met his gaze steadily, seeing the lie in his eyes, seeing the kind of man who would view an injured horse as an inconvenience rather than a creature deserving of care. She thought of Aurora standing in the sunlight just minutes ago, thought of the terror in the horse's eyes when she had first arrived, thought of the decision she had made days ago to protect this horse who had survived so much. "If I do have your horse, Mr. Caldwell, she's under my medical care as a veterinarian, and she won't be going anywhere until I determine she's healthy enough to travel and that she'll be going to a safe environment." The tension in the air was palpable. Marcus Caldwell's expression shifted from calculated politeness to barely contained fury. He was not a man accustomed to being challenged, especially not by a woman living alone in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. He took a step closer to Elena, using his height and presence to try to intimidate her, a tactic that had probably worked countless times in boardrooms and business dealings. "Miss, I don't think you understand the situation here. That horse is my property, registered in my name with papers proving ownership. You have no legal right to keep her." His voice had lost its veneer of civility, revealing the iron beneath. "I've been patient because I understand you probably acted out of compassion, but my patience has limits. I want my horse back today, right now, and I'm not leaving without her." Elena held her ground, though her heart was pounding. She had dealt with difficult clients before, with men who thought they could bully her into doing what they wanted, and she had learned that showing fear only made things worse. She crossed her arms and looked Marcus Caldwell straight in the eye, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Mr. Caldwell, Montana law is very clear on animal abandonment and neglect. When I found that horse, if it's yours, she was days away from death. She had been surviving in sub-zero temperatures for weeks with no food or shelter. She was being chased by coyotes and had multiple injuries. Those are facts, and they tell a story that contradicts your claim of an accidental escape." Marcus's face flushed red. "You have no proof of any of that. For all I know, the horse escaped yesterday and you're making up stories. You're a veterinarian, you said? Then you should know that horses can lose weight quickly, that injuries happen. None of that proves abandonment." Elena felt anger building in her chest, hot and fierce. She had spent 4 days nursing Aurora back from the edge of death, had stayed up nights monitoring her condition, had poured her heart into saving a horse that this man had thrown away like trash. The audacity of him standing here now, demanding Aurora back as if he had any right to her, was almost more than she could bear. "I documented everything," she said, her voice cold. "Photographs, detailed medical notes, timestamps. I have evidence of her condition when she arrived, evidence that will hold up in any court. And I have the right as a veterinarian to refuse to release an animal into a situation where I have reasonable cause to believe it will be neglected or harmed." Marcus laughed, a harsh sound without humor. You really think you can fight me on this? Do you have any idea who I am? I have lawyers, good ones, who will bury you in paperwork. I have connections with every judge and official in this county. You're nobody, living in the middle of nowhere, playing at being a hermit. You cannot win this fight. His words were meant to intimidate, to make Elena feel small and powerless, and she would be lying if she said they did not affect her. She was alone out here with limited resources and no support system. Marcus Caldwell probably did have the kind of influence he claimed, the kind of money that could make her life very difficult. But as she stood there listening to his threats, she thought of Aurora, thought of the terror and exhaustion in the horse's eyes when she first arrived, thought of the way Aurora had started to trust again over the past few days. "Maybe I can't win," Elena said quietly, but with steel in her voice. "But I can make it expensive and public. I can contact every animal welfare organization in the state, every media outlet that covers animal cruelty cases. I can make sure that everyone knows Marcus Caldwell abandoned a purebred Arabian horse in the wilderness to die. I can make sure your reputation, your business, everything you've built gets dragged through the mud. So go ahead, bring your lawyers. I'll bring the truth." The silence that followed was heavy with hostility. Marcus stared at Elena with undisguised hatred. His jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek. He was weighing his options, calculating the potential damage, trying to decide if this woman was bluffing or if she really would follow through on her threats. Elena stared back unflinchingly, letting him see that she was deadly serious, that she would do whatever it took to protect Aurora. Finally, Marcus seemed to come to a decision. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook, the kind of gesture that probably solved most of his problems. He wrote quickly, tore off the check, and held it out to Elena. The amount was staggering, more money than Elena had seen in years, enough to completely renovate her cabin and clinic, enough to live comfortably for a long time. $25,000, Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "That's more than the horse is worth in her current condition. Take it, keep your mouth shut about where you found her, and we forget this whole conversation happened. I'll tell people she died in the wilderness, and you get to play hero with my money." Elena looked at the check, at the zeros that represented a small fortune to her but probably meant nothing to Marcus Caldwell. For a brief moment she was tempted that money could do so much good, could help her help other animals, could secure her future in this harsh place. But then she thought about what it would mean to take it, to sell Aurora back to the man who had tried to kill her through neglect, to put a price on the trust the horse had started to place in her. She reached out and took the check from Marcus's hand. He smiled, assuming victory, his arrogance reasserting itself, but Elena's next action wiped the smile from his face. She tore the check in half, then in half again, and let the pieces flutter to the ground between them. "No amount of money is worth betraying that horse's trust," Elena said firmly. "She came to me for help, and I won't send her back to someone who sees her as property instead of a living being with feelings and needs. Your money means nothing here, Mr. Caldwell." "The answer is no." Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, rage, settling finally on cold fury. "You stupid woman," he hissed. "You have no idea what you've just done. I will destroy you for this. I will take that horse back, and I will make sure you regret ever crossing me. You think living out here protects you? You think your little cabin and your principles matter? They don't. Nothing you have matters compared to what I can do to you." "Then do it," Elena said quietly. "But you're not getting Aurora. Not today, not ever, if I have anything to say about it. Now get off my property before I call the sheriff and report you for trespassing and threatening behavior." Marcus stood there for another long moment, his rage almost palpable in the cold air. Then he turned on his heel and stalked back to his truck. Before getting in, he turned back one last time, his face a mask of controlled fury. "This isn't over," he said. "Not by a long shot." The truck's engine roared to life, and he drove away fast enough to spray snow and gravel, leaving deep ruts in Elena's driveway. She stood there watching until the vehicle disappeared from view, her body trembling now that the confrontation was over, the adrenaline beginning to ebb. She walked on shaky legs to the barn, needing to see Aurora, needing to confirm that her decision had been the right one. The horse was standing in her stall, looking toward the door as if she had heard the raised voices and been concerned. When Elena entered, Aurora nickered softly and walked to her, pressing her soft muzzle against Elena's chest in a gesture that felt like gratitude or reassurance, or perhaps both. Elena wrapped her arms around Aurora's neck and let out a shaky breath. "I hope I did the right thing," she whispered, "because I think I just made a very powerful enemy." The next 3 days were tense, with Elena constantly looking over her shoulder, expecting Marcus to return with lawyers or law enforcement or worse. She kept the rifle closer than usual, loading it fully and keeping it by the cabin door where she could grab it at a moment's notice. At night, she lay awake listening to every sound, wondering if she had been foolish to challenge a man with Marcus Caldwell's resources and connections. But every time doubt crept in, she would go to the barn and see Aurora, see the way the horse's condition was improving day by day, and she knew she had made the only choice her conscience would allow. Aurora was transforming before Elena's eyes. The desperate, terrified creature who had arrived nearly dead was gradually disappearing, replaced by a horse who was beginning to remember what it meant to feel safe. Her coat, which had been dull and lifeless, was starting to regain its luster as proper nutrition and care took effect. The injured leg was healing well, the swelling almost completely gone, though Elena still kept it wrapped and limited Aurora's movement to gentle walks around the enclosure. Most remarkably, Aurora's personality was emerging, a spirited intelligence that had been buried under layers of trauma and survival instinct. On the 4th day after Marcus's visit, Elena heard the sound of another vehicle approaching. Her heart jumped into her throat and she grabbed the rifle before going to the door. But this time it was a vehicle she recognized, an old battered Jeep that belonged to Tom Bradley, her nearest neighbor who lived about 12 miles away. Tom was in his 70s, a retired forest ranger who had lived in these mountains longer than Elena had been alive. He was one of the few people she trusted, someone who had helped her through that brutal first winter and had never asked for anything in return. Tom climbed out of his Jeep slowly, his arthritic joints making every movement careful and deliberate. He was wearing his usual outfit of worn Carhartt coveralls and a flannel shirt, and his weathered face was creased with concern. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting, a gesture from another era that Elena had come to find endearing. "Elena, we need to talk," Tom said without preamble. "I've been hearing things in town, things you need to know about." Elena invited him inside, and they sat at her small kitchen table while she made coffee. Tom accepted the mug gratefully, warming his gnarled hands around it before speaking. "Marcus Caldwell has been making moves," Tom said. "He filed a report with the sheriff claiming you're holding stolen property. He's got a lawyer sending letters to the county prosecutor's office. Word is he's also been making calls to the state veterinary board, trying to get your license suspended or revoked. The man is serious about getting that horse back, and he's got the money to make it happen." Elena felt cold dread settling in her stomach. She had expected retaliation, but the speed and scope of Marcus's response was more aggressive than she had imagined. The veterinary board worried her most. While she maintained her license and technically operated within the law, there was always room for interpretation, especially when someone with money and influence was pushing for a specific outcome. "There's more," Tom continued, his expression grave. "I've been asking around, doing some checking on this Marcus Caldwell character. He's not just wealthy, Elena. He's connected in ways that make him dangerous. He's friends with the county commissioner, the district attorney, half the judges in the region. When he wants something to happen, it happens. And right now, what he wants is to make an example out of you." Elena stared into her coffee, processing this information. Part of her wanted to give up, to hand Aurora over and end this fight before it destroyed her. But a larger part, the part that had driven her to become a veterinarian in the first place, refused to surrender. She looked up at Tom, her jaw set with determination. "I can't give her back, Tom. You should see what he did to her, how he just dumped her in the wilderness to die. If I send her back, I'm no better than he is." Tom nodded slowly, as if he had expected this answer. "I figured you'd say that. Which is why I've been making some calls of my own. You're not as alone in this as you think." Over the next hour, Tom explained what he had been doing. He had contacted friends in the animal welfare community, people who had worked with him during his ranger days. He had spoken to a lawyer he knew who specialized in animal rights cases, a woman who had agreed to take Elena's case pro bono because she hated bullies like Marcus Caldwell. He had even reached out to a journalist who covered rural issues for a regional newspaper, someone who might be interested in the story of a wealthy man abandoning an expensive horse and then trying to intimidate the person who saved it. "You've got people on your side, Elena," Tom said. "Good people who believe in doing the right thing. Marcus Caldwell might have money and influence, but you've got something more important. You've got the truth, and you've got a community that doesn't like seeing its own pushed around by rich outsiders." Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes, overwhelmed by Tom's support and by the realization that she was not as isolated as she had believed. She had spent 6 years building walls around herself, protecting her wounded heart by keeping the world at arm's length. But now, in her moment of greatest need, those walls were proving to be less solid than she had thought. People cared. People were willing to help. The thought was both terrifying and comforting. That afternoon, Elena received a call on her satellite phone. It was the lawyer Tom had mentioned, a woman named Sarah Chen, who had a reputation for taking on powerful defendants and winning. Sarah was direct and no-nonsense, asking detailed questions about Aurora's condition when she arrived, about Elena's documentation, about the confrontation with Marcus. Elena answered everything honestly, sending Sarah the photographs she had taken and her detailed medical notes. Sarah was quiet for a moment after reviewing everything, then spoke with quiet satisfaction. "This is good, Elena. Very good. You did everything right. Documenting her condition, providing immediate medical care, refusing to release her to a potentially harmful situation. Montana law is actually quite strong on animal welfare, and we have a solid case for your actions being not just legal but ethically necessary. Marcus Caldwell is used to bulldozing people with money and lawyers, but this time he picked the wrong fight." The words should have been reassuring, but Elena knew that legal battles could drag on for months or years, draining resources and energy. She expressed this concern to Sarah, who responded with a confidence that Elena found both inspiring and slightly unnerving. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah said. "Marcus will push hard initially, expecting you to fold under pressure. When you don't, when he realizes this is going to be a long public fight, he'll start to reconsider men like him hate negative publicity more than they hate losing money. The key is to make sure this story gets out, to make sure people know what he did. That's where the journalist comes in." 2 days later, a reporter named David Martinez arrived at Elena's cabin. He was younger than she expected, probably in his early 30s, with an earnest quality that reminded Elena of herself before cynicism had set in. He spent hours interviewing her, photographing Aurora, documenting the horse's recovery and the evidence of her previous condition. He was particularly interested in the Coyote attack and Aurora's desperate run to Elena's cabin, seeing in that story a dramatic narrative that readers would connect with emotionally. Throughout all of this, Aurora continued to heal. She seemed to sense the tension surrounding her but remained calm, as if trusting Elena to handle whatever was happening in the human world. The bond between woman and horse deepened with each passing day, built on quiet moments of care and understanding, on gentle touches and soft words, on a mutual recognition of survival against odds. The article appeared in the Sunday edition of the Montana Rural Gazette, and its impact was immediate and devastating to Marcus Caldwell's carefully constructed reputation. David Martinez had written a powerful piece titled, "Abandoned in the Snow, The White Horses Fight for Survival," complete with photographs of Aurora in her weakened state and detailed documentation of her injuries. The article laid out the facts clearly. A wealthy ranch owner had abandoned a valuable purebred horse in the wilderness during one of the harshest winters in recent memory, and when the horse miraculously survived and was rescued, that same owner had attempted to intimidate the veterinarian who saved her. But what made the article truly damaging was the human interest angle David had woven throughout. He had interviewed Elena extensively, capturing her dedication and compassion, painting her as a David facing down Goliath. He had spoken to Tom Bradley and other neighbors who testified to Elena's character and her reputation for helping any animal in need. He had even tracked down Dutch, the ranch manager who had been forced to abandon Aurora, and Dutch, eaten up by guilt, had confessed everything on record. The response was explosive. The newspaper's website crashed from the volume of traffic as the story was shared across social media platforms. Animal welfare organizations issued statements condemning Marcus Caldwell and calling for investigations into his ranch operations. Local television stations picked up the story, sending crews to interview Elena and film Aurora's recovery. The state veterinary board, which had been considering Marcus's complaint against Elena, quietly shelved the case under pressure from public opinion and their own ethical guidelines. Most importantly, regular people responded. Elena's mailbox, which rarely held anything more than occasional packages, began overflowing with letters of support. Her phone rang constantly with offers of help, donations, and encouragement. Several lawyers contacted Sarah Chen offering to assist with the case. A local feed store donated supplies for Aurora's care. A group of ranchers organized a patrol, taking turns driving past Elena's cabin at night to ensure Marcus did not try anything foolish under cover of darkness. Marcus Caldwell found himself in an unfamiliar and deeply uncomfortable position. He was losing the narrative. His attempts to control the story, to paint Elena as a thief and himself as a victim, crumbled under the weight of evidence and public sentiment. His business partners began distancing themselves, concerned about the association. Winter Haven Ranch, which had always been fully booked for events and boarding, saw a wave of cancellations. His social standing in the community, built over decades, was eroding with shocking speed. 1 week after the article published, Marcus made his final play. He arrived at Elena's cabin again, but this time he was not alone. He brought his lawyer, a slick-suited man named Preston, who had made a career of representing wealthy clients in difficult situations. They also brought the county sheriff, a tired-looking man named Roberts, who had been pulled into this mess against his better judgment. Tom Bradley had warned Elena they were coming, and she was ready. The group assembled in Elena's small living room, an awkward gathering of opposing forces in a space meant for solitude. Marcus looked older than he had during their first confrontation, the stress and negative publicity clearly taking a toll. His lawyer did most of the talking, laying out a new proposal in careful legal language that boiled down to a simple offer. Marcus would sign over complete ownership of Aurora to Elena, relinquishing all claims to the horse in exchange for Elena signing a statement saying she would not pursue any criminal charges or civil lawsuits against him. It was, essentially, surrender disguised as compromise. Elena looked at Sarah Chen, who had driven up from Helena to be present for this meeting, and Sarah gave her a slight nod. They had discussed this possibility, had agreed that if Marcus offered to give up Aurora without conditions that would harm Elena or other animals, they should accept. The goal had always been to protect Aurora, not to punish Marcus, though Elena would be lying if she said there was not a part of her that wanted to see him held fully accountable for what he had done. "I have conditions of my own," Elena said, her voice steady. "First, you don't just sign over Aurora. You pay for all her medical expenses, past and future, related to the injuries she sustained during her abandonment. Second, you agree to an inspection of Winter Haven Ranch by an independent animal welfare organization, and you address any deficiencies they find. Third, you make a substantial donation to the Montana Equine Rescue Foundation in Aurora's name. And fourth, if you ever acquire another horse, there's a provision that allows for welfare checks without notice." Marcus's face darkened with anger at these demands, but his lawyer put a restraining hand on his arm and whispered something in his ear. Preston then addressed Elena with professional coolness. "Those are extensive conditions, Ms. Whitmore. My client is already making a significant concession by giving up a valuable animal you're asking for quite a bit more." Sarah Chen spoke up before Elena could respond. "Your client abandoned a horse to die and then attempted to intimidate my client when she saved that horse's life. The court of public opinion has already rendered its verdict, and we both know how a legal case would go if this proceeds to trial. The conditions Ms. Whitmore outlined are more than reasonable. They're merciful, considering what could be demanded." The room fell silent as Marcus and his lawyer exchanged glances, engaging in the kind of wordless communication that comes from working together on damage control. Finally, Marcus gave a slight nod, and Preston began drafting the agreement on his laptop. The process took 2 hours, with Sarah reviewing every word to ensure there were no hidden clauses or escape hatches. Sheriff Roberts sat quietly throughout, clearly relieved that this situation was resolving without requiring his further involvement. When the papers were finally signed, notarized, and distributed, Marcus stood to leave without a word. But at the door, he turned back to face Elena one last time. His expression was complex, mixing resentment with something that might have been grudging respect or perhaps just exhaustion. "You won," he said simply. "But you should know, it wasn't the law or the lawyers or even the bad publicity that made me give up. It was seeing those pictures of Aurora, seeing what I did to her. I spent 50 years building a reputation, and I destroyed it in one moment of cruelty. I'll have to live with that." Elena met his gaze steadily, seeing for the first time a glimpse of human regret beneath the arrogance. "Maybe you will," she said, "and maybe that's the point. Maybe we're supposed to live with our mistakes, to let them change us into something better." Marcus left without responding, followed by his lawyer and the sheriff. When the vehicles had driven away and the sound of engines faded into the mountain silence, Elena walked slowly to the barn. Aurora was waiting in her stall, her head turned toward the door as if she had been listening to everything that had transpired in the cabin. In the 6 weeks since her desperate arrival, she had transformed completely. Her white coat now gleamed with health. Properly nourished muscles filled out her frame, and the injured leg had healed enough that she moved without any trace of a limp. But the most remarkable change was in her eyes, where the terror and trauma had been replaced by calm intelligence and something that looked remarkably like contentment. Elena entered the stall and wrapped her arms around Aurora's neck, breathing in the warm horse smell that had become so familiar and comforting. "She's yours," Elena whispered against Aurora's mane. "Completely, legally, forever yours. You're home now, and nobody can ever take you away." Aurora nickered softly and pressed her muzzle against Elena's shoulder, in that gesture of affection that had become their private language. The weeks that followed brought changes that rippled far beyond Elena's small cabin in the wilderness. The publicity surrounding Aurora's story had transformed Elena's quiet existence in ways she had never anticipated. People began seeking her out, not just for veterinary services, but for her expertise and compassion. Ranchers who had previously been skeptical of the city woman living in the woods now brought their animals to her with a new respect. Other rescue cases found their way to her door, animals that had been abandoned or abused, their owners knowing that if anyone could save them, it would be the woman who had defied Marcus Caldwell. Elena found herself building an expanded clinic in what had been storage space in her barn, funded partly by Marcus's settlement and partly by donations that continued to arrive from people inspired by Aurora's story. She hired an assistant, a young woman named Maya, who had grown up on a ranch and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Together they treated injuries, performed routine care, and took in rescue animals that needed time to heal before being adopted into new homes. But Aurora remained special, the one animal Elena knew she would never place elsewhere. Every morning, Elena would wake before dawn and go to the barn, and Aurora would greet her with that same soft nicker that had become the soundtrack of Elena's days. They would walk together through the snow-covered landscape, Elena leading and Aurora following willingly. Two survivors who had found each other at exactly the right moment. On these walks, Elena would talk to Aurora about everything, her thoughts and fears, her memories of her old life, her growing contentment with this new existence she had built. She spoke of her ex-husband sometimes, realizing with surprise that the bitterness had faded, replaced by a kind of grateful acceptance. His betrayal had hurt terribly, but it had also set her free, had pushed her into this life where she was needed and valued in ways she had never been in Seattle. Aurora listened with those intelligent eyes, her ears flicking toward Elena's voice, and though Elena knew it was probably foolish to imagine the horse understood, there were moments when it felt like genuine communication passed between them. Perhaps it was, Elena thought. Perhaps understanding did not always require words. Perhaps two beings who had both known betrayal and survival could recognize each other's souls in ways that transcended species. Spring came gradually to the Montana mountains, the snow melting to reveal the green beneath, the frozen streams breaking free and rushing with new life. Aurora shed her thick winter coat, and underneath her white coat gleamed even more brilliantly in the strengthening sun. Elena took her on longer walks now, eventually progressing to rides when the injured leg proved completely healed. Riding Aurora was nothing like riding the gentle old mare she had owned before Aurora moved with grace and power, her Arabian breeding evident in every stride, and Elena felt privileged to be trusted with such magnificence. The story of the white Arabian and her rescue continued to inspire long after the initial publicity had faded. David Martinez's article won a regional journalism award, and he used his acceptance speech to talk about the importance of standing up for those who could not speak for themselves. Sarah Chen successfully prosecuted 2 other cases of animal abandonment, using the precedent set by Elena's case to argue for stronger enforcement of welfare laws. Tom Bradley, in his quiet way, spread the story throughout the rural community, and it became a kind of legend, a reminder that doing the right thing, even when it was difficult, could make a difference. Marcus Caldwell largely disappeared from public view, selling Winter Haven Ranch and moving away from Montana entirely. The independent inspection Elena had insisted upon revealed multiple violations of animal welfare standards, and the resulting scandal had made continuing his business impossible. Some said he had moved to Arizona, others claimed he had gone abroad. Elena did not know and did not particularly care. He had served his purpose in her story, had been the catalyst that brought Aurora into her life, and now he was irrelevant. 1 year to the day after Aurora had arrived, Elena stood on her porch watching the horse graze in the meadow she had fenced last summer. The mountains rose in the distance, still capped with snow even in summer, beautiful and indifferent to human drama. Aurora looked up from her grazing and stared directly at Elena, and in that moment, Elena understood something profound. They had saved each other, she and this remarkable horse. Aurora had given Elena a purpose, had pulled her out of her self-imposed isolation and reminded her why she had become a veterinarian in the first place, and Elena had given Aurora safety, love, and a second chance at life. The cabin that had once been a hiding place had become a true home. The wilderness that had seemed hostile now felt protective. And the woman who had arrived here 6 years ago, broken and bitter, had been transformed by the love of a white Arabian horse into someone stronger, more compassionate, more fully alive than she had ever been before. Elena walked down from the porch and across the meadow to where Aurora stood. The horse lowered her head, and Elena rested her forehead against Aurora's, closing her eyes and feeling the warmth of the sun on her back, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers, the solid presence of this creature who had changed everything. "Thank you," Elena whispered. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for reminding me that some things are worth fighting for." Aurora's only response was to breathe softly against Elena's face, but it was enough. It was everything. In the end, the story of Aurora and Elena was not really about a rich man's cruelty or a dramatic rescue or even the legal battle that followed. It was about two wounded souls finding each other in the vast wilderness and discovering that healing was possible, that trust could be rebuilt, that love came in many forms, and that sometimes the most profound journeys began with a desperate run through the snow toward a distant column of smoke. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like and share it with others who might need to hear it. Leave a comment telling us how Aurora and Elena's journey inspired you. And if you believe in standing up for those who cannot speak for themselves, remember that each of us has the power to make a difference, one act of compassion at a time. Subscribe to stay connected with more stories of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds between humans and animals. May you find your own Aurora, and may you have the courage to fight for what is right, no matter the cost.